Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Dennis sent me a note and said, Steve, check out the story about the judge here. And he goes, I don't think they went far enough. And I agree with you on this. That is, the people punishing the judge didn't punish him enough. But Georgia judge suspended for misconduct, and that's by the state Supreme Court there. So this story is from WJBF. Richard Adams and Rakaya Lennon wrote this. Swainsboro-based judge Robert Reeves will face a 30-day unpaid suspension and have a public reprimand published on charges of misconduct, according to a decision from the Supreme Court of Georgia this past July. So the judge was accused of doing something wrong. He's being punished with a 30-day unpaid suspension, so he'll lose 1 month pay. And then a public reprimand will be posted in various places such as newspapers. And you really wonder about this. According to the court, that is the Supreme Court, the suspension must begin no later than September 1st, and a public reprimand will be published in local newspapers of the various counties the man served, such as Fulton County Daily Report, and so on. His jurisdiction covered Candler, Emmanuel, Jefferson, Toombs, and Washington counties. Under the consent agreement between lawyers for the judge and the Supreme Court, he also agreed not to seek re-election to judicial office when his term expires on December 31st of 2026. So he's going to stay in office until then, but he was facing 58 formal charges of misconduct that occurred both inside and outside of the courtroom in 14 instances over a 7-year period, according to court documents. He will also have to recuse himself from hearing any cases involving lawyers who leveled accusations against him. Now, here's the thing. 58 formal charges based on 14 instances over a 7-year period. Yes, the allegations are the stuff actually happened more than 7 years ago, some of it. And it's just now getting adjudicated. And you'll notice that his attorneys cut a deal with the Supreme Court. In essence, it's like a plea bargain, where they said, instead of having a full-blown hearing on this, what we're going to do is we'll agree to a certain form of punishment and then agree that he did these things that we're agreeing to, and that way it'll short-circuit the whole process. And the problem with that, of course, is whether or not the punishment fits what he's accused of. Under the consent agreement, the judge admitted the charge or admitted that evidence exists to prove 33 of the 58 charges of misconduct. Counts of misconduct that span 7 of Reeves' 17 years of judgeship mainly concern his use of coarse, insensitive, demeaning, and or insulting language, particularly with women. One involved a series of minor but nonetheless unwanted physical contacts between the judge and a female lawyer. And one of the things that I occasionally I'll say stuff on my videos that is so painfully obvious. And I have some people who say, Steve, do you really need to point out the painfully obvious? Yes, I do, because some people don't understand these things. And so when you're in a situation where you're thinking it might be appropriate to touch somebody, ask yourself, if you're a man, for instance, and that was a man, would you touch that man? And most guys would say, no, I don't touch guys. Why would I do that? And why would you touch a strange woman? I'm talking about a stranger to you. And so if a judge is going to be touching a female lawyer, would he be touching a male lawyer in the exact same way, in the exact same manner, if in fact it was simply switched? And if the answer to that question is no, then, well, you don't touch her either. And you might say, but Steve, when would you touch a female lawyer? On the same occasions that touch a male lawyer, such as shaking hands. So I walk up to a lawyer, I've just, hey, how you doing? Steve Lehto. Shake hands. Yeah, that's appropriate. But to walk up to a woman lawyer and put your hand on her shoulder, would you do that to a man? Now, you might say, Steve, I would. Well, guess what? I wouldn't, because you got to understand that you might be able to do that with a guy and get away with it, but it's just not appropriate. So in a courthouse, everything should be professional at all times. So a hearing panel concluded that the judge's misconduct was willful and taken in bad faith, including habitual intemperance, for example, rude, abusive, or off-color language, or improper and unsolicited physical contact, and or conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, acts which brought his office into disrepute. But while the hearing panel felt that a public reprimand was insufficient, it also felt that removal from office would be too severe. While the hearing panel noted there were no published Georgia judicial discipline matters directly comparable to these charges leveled against the judge, the Georgia Supreme Court added that there is no allegation that the judge failed to perform his judicial duties. He showed up for work, he did his job, but while doing his job, he was doing things that caused people to get upset. And I can tell you right now, I actually was thinking about this. In 33 years of practicing law, the only judges who ever touched me did so through a handshake. Okay? And I have a sneaky feeling if I were to poll the various female attorneys I know and say, how many times have other attorneys or judges touched you beyond a handshake? And I have a sneaky feeling a lot of them say, oh, happens all the time. So the problem is, with an attorney, it's one thing. With a judge, it's another. And so I often refer to the Code of Judicial Conduct because most states have got one. I'm betting all states do, but I could be wrong. And I often refer to the ones from Michigan. And occasionally people say, Steve, you know this case is happening in Georgia. Look it up in Georgia. So I did. And it turns out they've got a thing called the Code of Judicial Conduct in Georgia. And there are two basic rules. In fact, the one rule I'm going to point out is the first rule. It's Rule 1.1. Preserving judicial independence, integrity, and impartiality. An independent, honorable judiciary is indispensable to justice in our society. Judges shall participate in establishing, maintaining, and enforcing high standards of conduct, and shall personally observe such standards of conduct so that the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary may be preserved. The provisions of this code should be construed and applied to further that objective. So we're talking primarily here about the integrity. The integrity. And so if you go into court and you hear a judge using inappropriate language, for instance, that lowers the perceived integrity of the court, you look at the court and go, oh, there's a judge using that kind of language which you shouldn't be using. Judges shouldn't behave like that. Then it's not just the judge. You actually think less of the whole court. So you want to get away from that. But one of the cool things about these rules, and you want to look them up, you can just Google Code of Judicial Conduct and type in your state. There's a commentary where they actually explain the rules, which a lot of laws don't have explanations. But these rules do. Deference to the judgments and rulings of courts depends on public confidence in the independence, integrity, and impartiality of judges. The independence, integrity, and impartiality depends in turn upon their acting without fear or favor. Although judges should be independent, they shall comply with the law, including the provisions of this code. Public confidence in the impartiality of the judiciary is maintained by the adherence of each judge to this responsibility. Conversely, violation of this code diminishes public confidence in the judiciary and thereby does injury to the system of government under law. And so a lot of this stuff I'm betting happened back in chambers, meaning that the public didn't see it, but the attorneys did. And it sounds like a whole bunch of attorneys were involved in filing complaints here. So, that does talk about the integrity of the courtroom. And then Rule 2.1 says complying with the law and promoting public confidence in the judiciary, judges shall respect and comply with the law and shall act at all times in a manner that promotes public confidence in the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary. I'm pointing that out because there's three things they're concerned with here: the independence of the judiciary, integrity of the judiciary, and the impartiality of the judiciary. Now, the independence of the judiciary is not really the subject here of the complaints against this guy. No one's claiming that these things somehow mean something else. And the impartiality a little bit, because if he's doing something bad to one side, it would appear that he's being partial to the other side. But the integrity of the court. And that is so important. And so in the commentary here, it says the prohibition against behaving with impropriety or the appearance of impropriety, which I talk about all the time, applies to both the professional and personal conduct of a judge. Because it is not practicable to list all prohibited acts, the proscription is necessarily cast in general terms that extend to conduct by judges that is harmful, although not specifically mentioned in the code. Actual improprieties under the standard include violations of law, court rules, or other specific provisions of the code, including the rule at 1.1. The test for appearance of impropriety is whether the conduct would create in reasonable minds a perception that the judge's ability to carry out judicial responsibilities with integrity, impartiality, and competence is impaired. And so, I've been in front of a lot of judges in my life, a lot of judges, most of them as an attorney. That's a joke. It's from The Simpsons, okay? But in 33 years, I can tell you that the vast majority of judges I've been in front of were fine. We're fine. And every now and then you come across one where you're like, ooh, not only is something wrong here, that person shouldn't even be a judge. And I did a video years ago about Judge Brennan from Michigan. I'd been in front of her more than once. Horrible judge. She's no longer on the bench for some strange reason. And however, you watch something like that, and I know some people are going to go, Steve, until you've been in 100 different courtrooms, understand that the sample size I'm working with is larger than most. And I've been in more than 100 courtrooms, hundreds of courtrooms. The vast majority of the judges are good. And then a bad one comes along, and they stand out like a sore thumb. You're like, ooh, how did that person become a judge? How are they still a judge? What? And then you hear about this where complaints were filed for years. And they're talking about a period of 7 years. Now, I don't know for a fact that people were filing complaints 7 years before they took action. Don't know that. But I've heard stories like that, where somebody files a complaint and they go, well, this is so minor. Somebody files another complaint and they go, this is so minor. Somebody files another complaint and they go, wait, there's a pattern here. And the pattern suddenly gets bad. Now, I would like to see investigations jump on things earlier. I've heard of situations where somebody filed a complaint and the entity that should look into it didn't because they go, it's a minor complaint. Well, then the person does something a little worse. Somebody complains. Still a minor complaint, not as minor as the previous one. And then what happens is the person who's not being reprimanded for doing things wrong starts going a little further. And next thing you know, they're out of control. So getting back to the numbers here, we've got 58 formal charges of misconduct that happen inside and outside the courtroom. And this is over 14 different instances in a 7-year period. And so they agreed to a 30-day suspension, unpaid, and notices of reprimand in a bunch of newspapers. There are people right now asking, what is a newspaper? A newspaper. Hey, your guess is as good as mine. Although I did deliver the Detroit Free Press as a young man. So Dennis, thanks for sending this. I do think this is a little light, but at least they did something, right? So Georgia judge suspended for misconduct, and that's from the state Supreme Court. And again, as I pointed out many times previously, the state Supreme Court oversees the courts of the state, including disciplinary issues. Richard Adams and Rakia Lennon wrote that for WJBF. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. If you're going to tell me stuff that we can't write down, it must not be true. #Lehto.